Okay, good morning, everyone. Just so everyone knows, this meeting is televised. This is meeting number 6 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs for the first session of the 42nd Parliament. So today what we're going to have, first of all, is our order and council appointment of Huguette Lebel to the position of Chair of the Independent Advisory Board for the Senate appointments, and we'll review her qualifications. And second, we will return to our study of the initiatives to make Parliament more inclusive, more friendly, more efficient, with an informal report from our researcher on what other parliaments around the world had do. And then the last, we will work on our agenda for the next meeting, which we haven't set yet. I just the witness is going to make a few statements. And then I will just make a comment before we go to the questioning, unless anyone has anything they want to raise at this time. So pursuant to Standing Orders 110 and 111, order in council appointment of Huguette Lebel to the position of Chair of the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments, referred to the committee on Friday, January 29th, 2016. And I welcome the witness. Thank you for coming on such short notice. This committee seems to, we're moving so fast that we didn't give people very much notice, so you only had a day or so that's fantastic that you could make it. And I started to read your CV this morning. It's as long as the meeting, so it's great. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and then we'll have some questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's been quite a long time since I appeared in front of a parliamentary committee, something I used to do quite frequently as a deputy minister. So I'm looking forward to this discussion this morning. As you know, the mandate that we have is to recommend non-binding, merit-based recommendations to the prime ministers for appointment to the Senate. I would just like to say a few words about my background, so that it can help you perhaps for your questions. As a deputy minister for 19 years, I was able to see the work of Parliament firsthand, because there are many pieces of legislations that come from various departments, as you know, and as a deputy minister you have to follow the process as it goes through the House of Commons and through the Senate, and be able to work and rework sometimes with the Minister and the Department of Justice some of the content of those legislation. So that is one area where I was able to see firsthand the, let's say, the architecture of the Parliament of our country. The second time the second area which brought me also close to the work of the House and the Senate was as president of Canadian CIDA, where many countries around the world wanted to learn from our own experience here. I'm thinking in particular of South Africa, for example, where we work very closely with South Africa on their constitutional review, and they were very interested in our form of federalism, but also in how the institutions of the state were working in Canada. And they were looking, of course, elsewhere, but we were the key supporter to help them learn from the rest of the world, and then, of course, adapt and make their own decisions at the end. I'm using South Africa, but there were many other countries which also were in the same situation, especially after 1989 and the fall of the Soviet Union. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe were also interested in what we were doing. So we were able during that period to do some twinning with various institutions of our own country to help those countries to think through how they could improve their own situation in their country. And perhaps my last point that I would like to make is that as chair of the board of Transparency International, which is an anti-corruption organization, people used to tell me that I would have work for the rest of my life and dealing with this issue. But you have to be an optimist, and this was in a very important area where we worked very hard at trying to help build the kinds of institutions in countries around the world that could prevent corruption and deal with it when it happens. and also in ensuring that the rule of law works in the countries where corruption is high. So we worked on conventions, recommended legislation. So again, there was quite a lot of work in this regard that I think is helpful to the work that we need to do at this time. So that's all I'd like to say, Mr. Chair, and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Donc, ça me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I just want to make one quick comment before we go to questioning. I'm hoping this committee showed great leadership and cooperation. It's the first committee meeting, and I hope it continues. And personally, in two things. One is that we, in this new parliament, showing a good example of respect to outside and appreciation of outside witnesses, whoever they are, for whatever committee they come before us, because we appreciate them. And the second is that we perform the task that Parliament assigned to us. And I'll just read it again. I read it at the end of the last meeting. But this meeting's being held pursuant to Standing Order 111, which states the committee's role is limited to an examination of the qualifications and competence of the appointee to perform the duties of the post to which he or she is being appointed. Members may also refer to pages 1011 to 1013 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice. And we will start questioning with Ms. Pepitas-Taylor, will be followed by Mr. Reid.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Once again, Madame Labelle, thank you for coming to join us this morning. We recognize that we held this reading very quickly, and thank you for freeing time in your schedule. We very much appreciate it. Secondly, I would also like to thank you for the contribution that you've made throughout your entire career. Your resume is extremely impressive. I don't even know where to start. Once again, thank you for all the contributions you've made to Canada. And thank you again for having accepted to appear or to chair the Senate committee. We recognize that this is a very important position, and we appreciate that you are ready to preside over that committee. Sometimes we ask witnesses what their qualifications are, what their degrees are, the kinds of accomplishments they have. And often our witnesses are shy to talk about all of their resume. But we would like you to go into details to tell us exactly what tell us your contributions and your degrees, so that all of the members of the committee can have a full understanding of all your accomplishments. Thank you. Aside from what I've already mentioned in my preliminary remarks, throughout my career, I worked at the Public Service Commission. I was chair of that commission, and at that time, as is the case now, we were there to ensure that public servants were nominated based on merit. I spent 5 years there, and I spent a lot of time making sure that we could be proud of the public service that we have, particularly because we have selection criteria, and also because we have a system that allows us to make sure that candidates could be part of the public service and to ensure that they meet selection criteria. It made me appreciate the importance of having people selected for important positions and using merit-based criteria, taking into account their qualifications, their experience, and their knowledge. That's one aspect. A second point. I worked closely with the OECD. I still work with them. I'm on the Secretariat General Committee in order to review how the OECD works to ensure greater integrity among its members and beyond, because the OECD works very closely with developing countries. That means that their work is not only oriented towards OECD countries. This committee is responsible for reviewing the OECD's work up until now on integrity, and it's tasked with fighting corruption. It's also tasked with making recommendations to the General Secretariat on what should be done to indicate if anything is missing in terms of what should be done in order to increase the impact that they have if they were to consider different solutions, supplementary solutions. Perhaps I'll stop there. Thank you. Could you also describe your university degrees and the other education that you have? We recognize that often our witnesses are shy about sharing this type of information, but we really want to have a good understanding. I've always thought it was important for one to continue to study as long as possible. In my case, I did this at part-time, with a family, and with a job when it came to my master's degree and my PhD. But if throughout all the departments where I've worked, we had research teams, if we want to fully understand how they work and what they do and make sure that we have the right people in place, I told myself that I'd better go get a PhD, where one learns a great deal on research and research methodology and so on, statistics and so on. That is why I chose to pursue my studies, and I graduated with my PhD at the age of 40, while being Deputy ADM over at Indian Affairs. I think that for me, and I would encourage it, that it's good to mentor young Canadians and Canadians who are not so young. I always encourage them to pursue their studies, not only because it offers them additional knowledge, but it gives them a great deal more self-confidence when it comes to what they can do in the future. Thank you.
On est bien. Merci.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Madame Labelle, welcome to our committee. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm very interested to learn more about your mandate and about some of the things that you are expected to do in that mandate, and to find out how exactly you would do that. I wanted to ask about the Phase 1 Senate appointment, nomination and appointment process, one which is underway right now, was announced on January 29th, Friday, January 29th at 6:30 p.m. And all applications under this process must be submitted by noon on February the 15th, at which point your role will kick in. I recognize you have no role at the moment while the applications are underway. I have concerns about the constitutionality of the Phase 1 process, and in particular, am concerned that the way in which it's structured may result in a compromise of the independence of people being appointed to the Senate unconstitutionally. And I wanted to ask you about
We have a point of order.
Point of order. I have some concerns that this goes beyond the purpose of today's review of the competency of the witness before us. An examination, Mr. Chair, of the mandate of the Senate appointments, the Independent Senate Appointments Committee, is not within the scope of the particular standing order by which this witness was called.
Yeah, if Mr. Reid could stay on the competence of the witness, that would be appreciated.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to ask that this point of order, which is taken, I think, something in the nature of a minute, not be taken off of my time. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, it's not. We stopped the time.
Okay, thank you very much.
We still have 6 minutes left.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So here's what I'm wondering about. You are being submitted nomination and application forms, which will, after they have been submitted to you and filled out, be considered Protected B. I'm just wondering whether that means that the name of the nominated individuals and of the agencies will remain confidential, and that you will be bound. Will you regard yourself as being bound not to reveal the names of the agencies or organizations that have put forward the nominations. Will that be something which you will not be able to
Mr.
share
Chair,
in the
sorry,
future?
my point of order is on the table, and he's continuing the line of questioning. I think you need to rule on my point of order.
Okay, Mr. Reid, if you could state to the qualifications and the competence of the witness to perform this role, that would be appreciated. And we stop the time again.
Just so I can be clear, Mr. Chair, what I'm doing is I'm trying to deal with the fact that we may have a witness who is being drawn in, not through her own fault, by any stretch of the imagination, into a process which is unconstitutional and does irreparable harm to the credibility and independence of people appointed to the Senate of Canada. And this might be a process which will be kept confidential and secret so that we cannot confirm whether or not that compromise of independence has occurred because of a process that she is being embroiled in, and where she would be required to treat as secret information that would be absolutely essential to determining this critical matter of public interest, whether or not newly appointed senators have in fact been, their independence has been compromised by means of the nomination process and the tight links that must be formed between the individual making the application and the nominating agency, a way that has never occurred before in our Confederation and that could, as I say, well violate the requirement that senators not be appointed in a manner that compromises their independence, something which the Supreme Court has been very strict about. That is a concern to me. And I think it should be a concern to all of us. This is our only chance to ask her before the appointment process is actually over. And at that point, the harm will have been done. I think it's reasonable to ask in this format, in this form, in this way.
That is a process question. The committee could look at that process if it so wills, but today's meeting is just to look at the qualifications of the witness to perform this role. So if you want to pursue process questions, it doesn't mean the committee can't proceed those on its committee business, but not today. This is just to ask the witness about her qualifications for this particular job, not the process.
My understanding had been we would be able to ask the witness any question that is germane. I don't recall having decided that we would only be able to ask her questions that were related to her own competence, something which I frankly am not challenging. I've no qualms about the competence or ability to perform her task of the witness. I think Madame Labelle is eminently qualified. What I am worried about is that she's being drawn into a process which will be unconstitutional and which we will not be able to remedy. And Mr. Chair, if I may go on just for a moment here, the critical point here is that we're about to go on break. When the break is over and we come back, it'll be the 16th of February. These nominations, the nomination process will be closed at that point, and it will be no use to ask her those questions then. I didn't design this. The government decided to make it such a rush to now limit us in a way that we can't correct unless we hold a special meeting next week to ask her these questions is
Mr. Reid,
problematic to say the least.
Mr. Reid, we're operating under a standing order of the House of Commons, which this committee has no authority to change and to expand at this time. So if you'd like to continue with your last 5 minutes on the qualifications of the candidate, and if you want to discuss those other items, but we have to start the time soon because other
Mr.
witnesses
Chair,
are going to lose their time.
I just want, are you saying that we are incapable of holding a meeting at which we ask her the kinds of questions I'm trying to ask about constitutional and ramifications, how she performs her job, and so on, that literally that's outside the remit of this committee? Or are you saying that we adopted a motion to hold this meeting which forbade the asking of these questions? That's important, because if it is if it's just that we move the motion in a certain way which forbade us to ask these questions, then I will seek the consent of the committee to open up the questions so that I may ask her these critical issues which really need to be dealt with before February 15th.
This committee is, and I've read this twice to you, Mr. Reid, so you should be aware of this, and you've been on the committee before. Standing Order 111, which states the committee's role is limited to an examination of the qualifications and competence of the appointee to perform the duties of the post of which she has been appointed. That's the understanding that all the committee members are here, that the witness is here, and because our time is going to run out, we're going to have to limit your time unless you want to continue asking on the competence of the member.
You know,
we'll go on to the next questioner.
Madame Labelle is ostensibly an individual who is independent. That's been emphasized over and over again in the government's statements with regard to her and the panel that she chairs. Independent must mean... I'm actually on a point of order, Mr. Lamoureux.
No, you're not. Scott, no.
Actually, Kevin, I am.
No, you didn't start it
and-
off by saying
We
a
have
point of order, Scott.
here.
Scott,
Mr. Lamoureux.
typically, Mr. Chair, from sitting back here, it looks more like Mr. Scott or Scott is just arguing with the chair. You raised a point of order. The order was, the chair made a determination on that point of order, and you're choosing to dispute the point of order. You haven't stated on a new point of order or anything of this nature. Let's put this thing into proper context. The standing orders allows for the committee to be able to call a witness of this nature. The chair has been very explicit, both at the beginning and now twice to you in explaining what the standing order allows for us to do. It was actually a Liberal member of the committee that moved the motion, believing that the will of the committee was to do exactly what it is the standing order dictates, dealing with the competence and qualifications of an appointment. If you wanted to question the policy aspect, and that's really what you're getting into, it would have been more appropriate to possibly suggest that it be debated in the House or in another forum. The standing order is very, very clear, and I think that we should respect the standing order. Scott, you've been very respectful of the rules in the past. I would suggest that we just continue to ask questions related to the standing order.
Okay, so I have ruled already, Mr. Reid. You have one last chance.
Well, my concern, Mr. Chair, is that we are not respecting the Constitution of Canada, which can only be defended because the tight deadlines in this committee at this meeting. You know, it was after our January 29th meeting that we learned this process would occur and be done on February the 15th. This is our only opportunity to ask some critical questions of whether or not information will be kept secret from us permanently with regard to whether or not the independence of future senators has been compromised by the nomination process.
Mr. Reid,
if you shut me down, you are shutting down the only opportunity we have to find out these critical questions that we're talking about the independence of a body of the Parliament of Canada, and that surely
on the same point of order,
deserves the opportunity to be discussed.
Mr. Reid, okay, no more points of order. We're going to move on to Mr. Christofferson. The committee has lots of time before the time. If they want to talk about the process, the committee can decide that on its committee business, but that's not the grounds of this particular meeting. Mr. Christofferson.
Good. Thank you, Chair. And thank you again very much for your time today. At some point, I hope we get to you. Just on the I don't have a lot to say on the qualification side. I mean, the paper speaks for itself. The only thing that struck me was when you were talking about going through your regular day today and saying, you know, I think I really need a PhD. And then you went out and got, like you buy a shovel over at Canadian Tire. That's impressive. As somebody with a grade 9 education, that looms large in terms of your qualification. Competency, that takes us into some other areas. Let me just say, though, Chair, before I get into the area of competency questions, the little skirmish we just saw between yourself and Mr. Reid, to me, right from the get-go, this is a perfect example of the absolute impossibility of jamming the square peg of appointments into the round hole of democracy. And so no matter what part of this process we dissect, it's never going to add up because it doesn't work. It doesn't fit in a democracy. So having said that and being left with no alternative, and it's a shame because we could use some real common sense in this whole issue, I want to ask about your thinking, Madame, when the criteria you use. I mean, you in the appointment of the Prime Minister sort of replace what Canadians do during an election, which is make a merit-based evaluation, usually on the doorstep or on the phone or email exchange, and we repeat it thousands and thousands of times, trying to convince people that we would meet their merit qualifications as they see it. And the cumulative effect of that is that we have an election, and as tough as it is, it's usually very clear who Canadians decided were merit-based and who weren't. And the beauty of the system is that if they get it wrong, if the Canadian and people in a riding feel they got it wrong, then they get a chance in the next election to do something about it. We don't have that. Once you're a senator and you're appointed, you're there till you're 75, and that's it. So I'm wondering what process, what talent, what experience, and what training you're looking for that, in your view, would give Canadians the ideal lawmaker. Because this isn't just about having a gilded life on the red carpet. It's also the fact that senators make laws, and in fact, their vote is worth more than our vote, because there's fewer of them. So what qualifications are you looking for when you're trying to replace the process that Canadians go through on the doorstep? What are you looking for when you're trying to choose what Canadians would consider to be their ideal lawmaker?
Ms. LaBelle?
Thank you. I must tell you that I have had many employees who had grade 9, and they did much better than I did, because they had used their own life to become experienced people. I think in terms of the criteria, we have those that are in the Constitution already, to start with, which is age, residency, property.
But really, that's not much more than pulse.
Yes, and then what we also are looking at, and this is public, is first of all, people who have a very strong ethical background, people who have extensive knowledge, experience, as well as hopefully an understanding of the institutions of our country. We're looking also with the identification of people with diversity, be they women and men, cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, in addition to professional diversity, so that there is more than the same kind of professions that are being recommended. So, you know, the list is longer, but these are the kinds of criteria. We're also looking at people who are ready to work in the Senate on a nonpartisan basis, which is part of what the mandate that was given. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that we're looking at. Recognized leadership in the field that they're in. Also, people who have been strong in serving their community, in addition to that. So we have quite an extensive list, which is public, of criteria, which are known to everyone who wishes to be considered.
Thank you for that. Now, given the fact that there's no built-in structural method of accountability, and it's only really now that the media, to be fair, are beginning to turn to senators and sort of ask them the kind of questions they ask us on a day-to-day basis, there's some accountability starting there. But what traits are you looking for that would indicate somebody understands that even though they're appointed for life and it's the greatest lottery win in the entire world, you not only get a beautiful paycheck and pension until you're 75, but you get to make laws. How great is that for a G7 country? So what traits would you be looking for that would give you the sense that senators-to-be would understand that there is some element of accountability in this process somewhere? Because it's not there structurally. So what would you be looking for in their personality to give you a sense that they understand that there is accountability? And do you believe that's a part of it? Because you didn't mention that as one of your criteria, Madame.
Thank you very much. I think that this is a very important part, and can best be demonstrated by the track record of the individuals, what they have done, how they have done, how they've accomplished the responsibilities that they have had in the past. I think that words take you only so far in this regard. So very much the background, what they have done, how they have done it, how they have succeeded in indeed demonstrating accountability. in the responsibilities that they have had in previous positions.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, time. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Mr. Christopherson asked a number of questions about how Madame Labelle is conducting herself in the role of chair of the advisory committee, which was precisely what I was trying to do, although the questions were, and he was permitted to go, whereas I was not, which I agree with by letting him go. But the fact is, if you ruled me out of order, he should have been ruled out of order too. He did not ask a single question about Madame Labelle's own qualifications. So therefore, it is clear that you think it's okay to ask questions about how she will conduct herself and how she regards her mandate as working, precisely the kinds of questions that I was seeking to ask. And I assume, therefore, if we now, on the Conservative side, ask those same questions, you will permit them. And the Liberals, who did not object to Mr. Christopherson's questions, will not object to those questions coming from Conservatives.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reid. If you want to use up all the time of the committee, so the witness doesn't get any questions. I'm going to, if it's okay with the committee, because the Conservatives did not get time yet to get their competency questions, and I'm going to move Mr. Richards up his 5-minute round ahead, and then there'll be 2 Liberal rounds just to give them a chance to get some questions in on the topic of this meeting.
Thank you. You know, I appreciate you being here today. You know, with this process, I think Canadians have a lot of concerns about the fact that there is a lot of information that won't be made available to Canadians. And I mean, Mr. Reid has raised some questions today that certainly I know are of concern as well. But certainly, you know, the idea that you know, you'll be making recommendations to the Prime Minister, which will never be known to the public, and no one will ever know whether the Prime Minister chooses from that list or not. You know, the secrecy around that is something that I know many Canadians are quite concerned about. So it certainly is. We certainly do appreciate the fact that you were here today, so at least that Canadians have some sense as to, you know, they can have confidence in the people that are appointed to this board. So that is appreciated. And so in regards to being able to sort of determine you know, under the subject matter that we have today, in the transitional process, it indicates that your advisory board would undertake some consultations with groups, and it lists a number of groups that those could consist of. So I guess my sense, I would like to get a sense as to your experience in being able to undertake such consultations. So obviously there's a lot of questions around these consultations, you know, about how they'll be undertaken, how will groups be approached, or will they be able to apply to come forward, on what criteria are those groups going to be chosen, you know, how the board would interact with those groups, will those groups being made public so people are aware of who those groups are. So I wonder if you can give us some sense as to how that process will be undertaken and how the consultations will be undertaken, whether the groups will be made public, and then therefore that allows us to be able to assess that against your previous experience undertaking similar types of consultations.
Your qualifications to undertake that process.
So just to be clear, Mr. Chair, are you indicating that the witness will not be allowed to answer my questions about how that process would look? And the reason that's important is if we have no sense as to what the process of the consultations would look like, what type of consultations will be undertaken, whether those groups are going to be made public, etc., we have no way of being able to assess the witness's abilities to be able to undertake those processes. We don't know the description of the job. We cannot assess whether someone can do the job.
Well, the witness can answer what she likes, but she knows she's not compelled to answer anything that's outside her competency and qualifications for this job. So the witness could go ahead.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, what we are doing, first of all, we put up a website so that it could be available to any Canadian. Secondly, we have worked very hard in terms of working through the press to make sure that through the press, through press releases, media advisory, we can again ensure that more and more Canadians and organizations are able to understand and hopefully recommend and apply. In terms of the organizations, which is your question, what we're doing is reaching out very widely to organizations around the country. And we will be, and we're doing this as we are talking, whether we're talking of business, labor, non-government organizations, arts, culture, development, and I could go on. So the list is very long, law, employment, and so on. So we are really reaching out very widely at this time, and we are continuing to do that. And
Thank
we
you.
will be
I'm
reporting.
sorry to interrupt. The chair's indicated I don't have much time left, and there's something
I'm
else
sorry,
I want
just want to say we'll
okay.
also be reporting on a regular basis, and I would presume that our report would be public as well.
Okay, thank you. So it's been made quite clear today that some of the questions that Mr. Reid had, which are very critical questions, have not been able to be allowed to be asked today. Some of the questions that I'm asking, which I believe are very important to be able to assess the qualifications, are not being allowed to be asked. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to put forward a motion that given that the committee has called the chair of the advisory board for Senate appointments to appear before this committee to examine her qualifications and her competence to perform the duties for this post, that she has been appointed under Standing Order 110 and 111, and given that the full process has not been launched or made public, how is the committee to properly be able to question the witness? So therefore, what I would like to do is move a motion that we ask the Minister of Democratic Institutions to come and appear before this committee so that we can get a better sense as to the process involved, and so that we can properly assess the qualifications of the individuals on this board. I would ask that the clerk be instructed to invite the Minister of Democratic Institutions to appear before this committee to be able to answer to those questions so we can properly conduct our duties here.
Okay, Mr. Richards, when we get to committee business later, we're not going to take up time from the witness right now. We'll go on to the next, Ms. Vandeveld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Madame Labelle, for making the time to come here today. I have looked through your CV. It is incredibly impressive. 13 honorary degrees. You've been on the boards of numerous advisory boards and the chair of a number of organizations, including WHO, the United Nations, Transparency International, and all of the work that you've done on anti-corruption. I think that that's tremendously impressive. I particularly wanted to also note that you were the chair of the board of Algonquin College, which is in my riding of Ottawa West Nepean, and also the Ottawa Carleton United Way, which has done a lot of good work in my riding. So I thank you for the tremendous contributions that you've made. This particular position will require a competence to be able to use good judgment, to be able to look at merit-based appointments, to be able to be to be able to use the judgment to be able to do that independently. And I would like to just go through some of your qualifications and background that will allow you to be able to be competent, to be able to perform the tasks that you will have. I noticed that you've been in a number, your understanding of governance is obviously very, very strong. You've been a deputy clerk of the Privy Council, you've been a deputy minister, you were on the board of the International Centre for Human Rights and Democratic Development, which did a tremendous amount of work until it was disbanded. It's a very, very effective board that talks about international best practices of good governance. And of course, all of the anti-corruption work you've done also goes to your understanding of democracy, your understanding of governance. So if you could talk a little bit about how your qualifications, your background, your expertise would be able to be used in order to be able to do the tasks that we've asked you to undertake.
Thank you very much. First of all, you raised the position of deputy clerk, which is one, of course, which works very closely with the committee's parliament because you're assisting in the position of the clerk as secretary to cabinet in this regard. And so that I found was very useful in giving me an overview of the government as a whole and in getting closer to the institutions of parliament as well, to the infrastructure of parliament. My work at the UN has been for many years, but more recently, in the last 6 years, I was on the board of the UN Global Compact, which is chaired by the Secretary General, and which really has 10 principles that it is trying to promote around the world in working with governments, with business, with various organizations, and they include, of course, human rights, labor, development, and the 10th principle on anti-corruption as well. So this was, I think, a way, and I'm still working with some of the staff of the UN Global Compact on one aspect, which is the business for the rule of law, and trying to get businesses around the world to not just live by the lowest standards, but be ready to top it up, but also be ready to make representations to those governments that are weak and help in the work that they can do. So that's one aspect of that. And of course, when you chair an organization, you have to look at the overall functioning of that organization, which I've had to do a number of times, not just with Transparency International, but with other institutions in Canada and outside of the country. I think these have been very helpful to me. And in terms of the laws of our country, I think, I was able when I was in the Privy Council, but also beyond that, and working with organizations to see the importance of the privacy law, which is one, of course, that protects private information for people.
Wonderful. I also see that you're a companion of the Order of Canada and you've received the Order of Ontario. And you've also been on the Advisory Council for the Order of Ontario, in which case you would have been part of a process where you would have had to make selections, look at people's qualifications and the merit, and draw from a wide variety of people with professional backgrounds. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Thank you. And also when I was I'm adding to your question here. When I was Deputy Minister of the Secretary of State, which is now Heritage, by virtue of the position, you automatically sit on the selection advisory body for the Order of Canada. So for 5 years over there. And basically, what is very important is what I learned through these two processes and a number of others. I'm also chairing a panel to select young people from developing countries to study at the master's level in sustainable energy development, so that they can go back to their country and deal with that big issue in their own sphere. And so, what you need is ensure that you've got the broadest information possible about individuals, that you're able to then work as a committee. And we have an excellent committee in the advisory board with Indira Samarasekera, who is former president of the University of Alberta, a research scientist as well as engineer. Danielle Jutras, who is dean of the Faculty of Law at McGill University. Again, someone who has a tremendous background. And then we have two people for each of the 3 provinces that we're looking at right now who are also outstanding people. So it is with these people together, and is the wisdom of more than one individual coming to the table, and in their own, each one of us identify who we feel are from all of these people that have surfaced, these individuals, candidates, to really come together and find what are the top people that we could recommend.
Thank you. Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chair, my colleagues across the room seem to be far more interested in the process than in the phenomenal quality of the candidate before us. But I'd like to go a little bit deeper into those qualifications in understanding the context of the role she's getting herself into here, which is, how do you see, Madame Lebel, the historical role of the Senate as a house of sober second thought?
Well,
It's sort of not on your qualifications. It's point of order. You can relate it to your qualifications, or you can answer what you want, but you don't have to.
Well, perhaps my answer here would be that as a deputy minister, I had to appear before the House of Commons, but also in front of the Senate. And was able to see on, as the senators reviewed legislation, how sometimes particular aspects were identified that and were able to improve the legislation in the long run. So it's been mostly through that kind of experience that I've been able to witness the responsibility of the Senate.
And that's fair. And the question does tie into your qualifications in that having experienced the Senate and seen it, you understand what the type of person you're looking for, and that you have the experience needed to have the judgment to do this. I think that was the purpose of the question. Through your career, you've also had to keep a lot of secrets, and I guess when you're hiring somebody in any role, you don't want it public who you didn't hire. It's sort of bad for them, it's bad for you. Can you talk about your background in keeping secrets at high levels within government?
Well, as we have to look at a conflict of interest here. You also have to go back to the orders in council, which means that you are bound to keep the information that is there in front of you. So I think it's through those instruments that one learns to keep information which cannot, either because of the privacy legislation or otherwise, be made public.
Okay. And so you understand the requirements for privacy for these applicants very, very clearly. I'm reading your CV. I was amused by two words at the very bottom of it. It said January 2016. I was wondering what the previous month looked like. When you started, where did you see your career going? Is this the type of thing that you'd hope to do as you built your career up to help guide this country?
I learned that I started my life in health and moved on to Indian and Northern Affairs in the Government of Canada, for example, and was able to discover the rest of Canada, discover our country, its people, many more than the ones I knew before. And basically, this was an impetus to stay as a public servant for as long as I did. And when I left, I could have stayed as a deputy minister, but I had had 19 years in that position, and I felt it was time to leave the space to others, but also to give back to the country and to the international community, because you will see that most of what I have done is voluntary. It has not been paid work. And that's fine. That was part of the decision. But it also meant that it gave me an opportunity to see in a very broad way our country through the departments that I was responsible for, and before being a deputy minister as well. I was in health and in Indian affairs and northern development, but also with the volunteer work that I have done outside of the country and in Canada. So it was a personal choice, but I felt that there were many other Canadians who also are doing the same thing. And I think all avenues can contribute to our country, whether you're in business, whether you're a member of parliament, or whether you're a non-governmental organization.
Sorry.
About 20 seconds left.
Okay.
I was going to say, you have, I note that in your plethora of honorary degrees, you have some that are not from Canada. I just wanted to know if you had some time to address international experience, but I think we're out of time. Just tell us a bit more about what you did outside of the country.
About countries?
What you did outside of Canada.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Outside?
But we'll have to come back to that later.
You'll have to answer that later.
Okay.
Mr. Reid, 5-minute round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question follows on Mr. Christofferson's questions about how you, given your previous role in Transparency International, would treat confidential and secret information, and Mr. Graham's question on how your experience as a public servant would cause you to treat confidential information. The nomination forms for senators filled out by organizations in the Phase 1 process are protected B once completed. do you regard this as meaning that for you, you would be unable not merely to reveal the content, but also the name of the nominating organization for a person who's applied to the Senate and has been accepted by the Prime Minister and then placed in the Senate? Would the information regarding who the nominating agency was, would that be something which would itself be protected, be information that you would be unable to reveal post facto?
I think that there would not be any problem in revealing the name of the organizations that have been consulted as widely as possible. I think the linking of the name with the candidate, then we would get into the privacy issue here, because one would have to deal with the name of the individual. So, you know, this is one of the things that our committee will need to work at as soon as this first phase is completed and we prepare our report in terms of how to best include what we should include in our report. Because we will be, you know, as I said before, we are consulting very widely at this time, and the wider the better, because it makes it possible for more outstanding people to be identified.
I am only referring to the phase one process, in which I assume you're not actually consulting. I could be wrong here, but I'm assuming you're not consulting, that you have to wait for organizations to send nominations into you. That doesn't really create a capacity to reach out. Not talking about what happens after phase one. Am I correct? In phase one, you have to simply wait for nominations to be submitted to you and applications, and then see if you've got two of that match
Point
up.
of order. I think we've been quite fair. There's been a lot of line of questioning about process, and this one is completely and utterly about process and not tied into Ms. LaBelle's qualifications or her experience at all.
Elizabeth, do you want to, any comments on
I don't know that I
your
can.
qualifications to deal with protected information?
Okay, thank you. I guess I need to go back to my time in the Privy Council and as a deputy minister, where the whole, you know, we had to respect the laws that we have, but also respect the individuals. And in that context, private information is private and needs to be protected based on the legislation that we now have.
Well, based on your experience dealing with issues of conflict of interest, how would you determine whether or not someone has effectively had to solicit an organization to support them, or has been chosen by an organization because that organization believes this is the person who will best represent that organization's interests in the Senate? A problem which clearly would violate the constitutional injunction that senators be independent. How would you deal with that criteria or that concern?
If you have looked at our website, the applications not only come from organizations, but there is also a need for 3 separate reference letters in relation to the candidates, which broadens, I think, the extent of what the individual can bring, and brings us more information in looking at the credentials of the individual. So it is not, you know, there is the organization, of course, that makes the recommendation, but at the same time, there will be letters of references that are part of the process.
50 seconds, Mr. Reid.
Sir, 5-0 or 1-5?
5-0.
5-0. Oh, thank you. Okay. I'm not sure I understood that. Are you saying you can go back to the individual and say, please submit additional information? What you submitted in your application form piques our interest but is insufficient for us. We require further information, or does it have to be all submitted at one shot by noon on February the 15th? I'm asking about the phase 1 process.
Sure.
You don't have to answer process questions, but answer what you want.
Well, again, Mr. Chair, there is no question that the likelihood that the information may not all come at the same time, as long as it is in by the deadline that has been provided. So, you know, you can get the recommendation, you can get the letter, but then you can get the letters of reference after. So it doesn't all have to come together in one package, as long as it is completed by the time that has been set.
Thank you. Mr. Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify how much time I have. I do note that the clock is past 12 o'clock.
You're at a 5-minute, well, we started late, so you have a 5-minute round.
Great, thank
Hopefully
you.
we can get to Mr. Christopherson.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Again, I also want to echo my colleagues on the government side in terms of first thanking you for appearing before this committee on such short notice. And we are all duly impressed by the incredible, I mean, I couldn't even get past the first paragraph before I just sort of started asking myself, Mr. Chair, what have I done with my life? And like you, I'm an individual who actually got his 4th degree by the time I was 40. So I take to heart that learning is a lifelong process, and I appreciate that we want to encourage younger individuals to pursue that as part of their own career development. I wanted. And this wasn't necessarily clear when I had the opportunity to review, Madame LaBelle, your curriculum vitae. But I'd like you to perhaps expand a little bit about your experience as it relates to bicameral parliaments or bicameral institutions. Obviously, your experience here with the House of Commons or with the Parliament of Canada, dealing with the House of Commons and the Senate is clear. But were there other experiences that you bring to the table through your international work that you feel contribute to your role and competency to serve on this particular advisory board?
Thank you, sir. I think it is more as president of Canadian CIDA that I had the opportunity to work and listen to requests to issues around the world, because we were working in over 100 countries. Not everyone was focusing, of course, on their parliament, but many were. And having to decide sometimes how to reconstruct what had become very dysfunctional in their country, or build sometimes close to from scratch. I'm thinking of a number of countries that are still struggling to really try to see if their parliament can work much better than it is. I'm thinking of countries like Haiti, who have worked very hard, but somehow, and a number of the states that are currently in a failing situation or fragile. But that's one aspect of people who were looking for experience, and there we were able to match them always with a number of countries that had a bicameral, because if this is what they were looking for, a bicameral system. But also through the OECD, through the European Commission work that I have been brought to do, especially in the last few years, I was able to see how a number of countries who have a similar parliamentary infrastructure as we have were asking themselves a number of questions. And so I think it is not so much in having been, in having focused only on that, but in seeing how those parliaments were able to try to find the best way forward. And some who did not have, bicameral might have said, this is better for us if we go that way. So I think that's all I can say at this time on that, but that international experience was very useful to me. And the G7, G8, a number of those countries, as you know, have bicameral situations.
Great. Thank you, Madam LaBelle. I just wanted, how much time? About a minute?
Yeah, 1 minute.
I just wanted to just very quickly just follow up on the point. Did you ever, in doing part of that review, particularly through your work with the OECD or other institutions, deal with the situation where, like we have here in Canada, where, of course, one of the houses of Parliament is an elected body, and another one is an appointed body. And how did you see that within the frame of democratic legitimacy as you looked at these countries that were facing those particular challenges that you just previously described?
I don't think, sir, that I can say that I have gone in and whether to look at Germany or looking at the United States or Australia, because they're also all in very different time frame, as you know, in terms of what they have and what they're trying to do as well at this time, or France, or so. But the UK is one that I've been closest to, and then we've looked at in terms of what they have been doing with their House of Lords. So that's the one I think that I'm more familiar with.
Thank you. So we'll close with Mr. Christofferson with a 3-minute round.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Chair, I do appreciate the extra effort to make sure that the full rounds were completed. Thank you. Madam, just to come back again to the competency in terms of how you would view the thinking that you're undertaking as you have each of these in front of you. My understanding is that you have to be recommended by an organization to get your name in the hopper. But even, I'm not 100% sure on that, but even if you could find a way to get yourself unilaterally put on the list, here's my concern. Are you not worried at all in your own thinking of applying this that we have the potential for an elite body, and all of us here qualify as elites, but an elite body appointing other people through the lens of that elitism, and we end up with more elites? And I say that again as a working class person background, although I've been in electoral politics for over 3 decades. I'm just a working class. If my resume went into you the first time I was elected, it wouldn't even stay on the table, let alone be considered. So my concern is how do you go about selecting candidates that may not even find themselves in front of you, and yet if we use the benefit of democracy, people like me can get elected because there's certain traits that electors say, I want that in my lawmaker. There's a lot of other things. I know there's lots of lawyers and doctors, and that's good, but I'd like somebody in there that knows what it's like to get up every day and get their fingernails dirty for a living. And I'm wondering, how do we avoid the continuation of the view that the Senate is full of elites, because they're all connected to somebody, and yet somehow this process and your thinking and your colleagues' thinking is going to give us a different result? Can you help me understand how you think we get there?
You have 1 minute to answer the question.
Thank you, sir. I think we're dealing with the first phase, 5 appointments. After that, when we move into the more regular period, then it will be individuals who will be applying. And that will give, I think, a very broad capacity. Hopefully, this will also give us a broad capacity. And as I mentioned before, I think it's very important that diversity prevails.
But the diversity would be by your definition and your colleagues, and that's it. Diversity as defined by Canadians doesn't come into it. Do you not think that's a problem in terms of the Senate that we'll end up with, given our trouble in the past?
I hope that we can demonstrate that when we're talking of diversity, we're also talking of diverse background, as well as individuals from...
But you'd be the one to decide what that mix is. This is what Canada looks like in terms of diversity as we decide, and yet that small group of people replace the thinking of all of Canadians. How on earth could we possibly end up with a Senate under that process that reflects the will of the Canadian people?
Your last chance, 10 seconds left.
I think that will be what people will witness eventually. I hope that our work will demonstrate that we can recommend the kind of diverse individuals that a Senate needs to have. And I guess it's once the nominations will be made recommended by the Prime Minister to the Governor General, that you'll be able to see whether we've done our work in the kind of way that you're talking about, sir.
Well, thank you.
Hope you get it right, because there's no way to get rid of them if you're wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaBelle, for coming on short notice and being here a little bit past 12, and we'll
Mr. Chair,
suspend
I would like the witness to hear this before you dismiss her, and I just wanted to move a quick motion. And we can dispense with the motion afterwards, but I did want her to hear this. I'd like to move that the proposed chair of the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments, being Huguette Lebel, is deemed qualified and competent to perform the duties to which she is being appointed.
Okay, that's a
And I
standard-
have Ms. Sahota seconding the motion.
Okay, that's a standard motion. We'll deal with it after we suspend, and then we'll go to the Library of Parliament report. We're suspend now.
That's a question.
I'll just check.
Okay, I asked you the question. Is it debatable?
thank our library researcher for doing a report, and we look forward to hearing from him. This will be, because he's not a called witness or anything, this will be very informal. So as he discusses, if you have a question, we'll just interrupt him while he's doing so he can, yes?
I apologize for interrupting you, sir. I'm just not clear where we are. We had a motion, and then we kind of dropped it.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about the next piece of the agenda, so I'm a little unclear.
There's a number of things under committee business. We'll do that after we hear the report, the motions and all that.
When you say the report, I'm sorry, the analyst was bringing a report for the second part of the meeting.
Yes.
But we're not there yet. We're still on the first part of this meeting. In other words, we had the witness, now there's a motion that flows from that, and then that's when we broke. Are we in camera now?
No.
Are we public?
Yeah.
We're still public, okay, so that's what I thought. So you had a break for a moment as the witness excused herself, and now it seems to me we'd be dealing with the motions in proper order, or we would say we're finished with that part of our agenda, we're moving to the second part, in which case we pick up at the next meeting where we left off, and that would be the placement of the motions in the proper order. So I'm just a little unclear where we are, Chair.
What's the committee's will on that?
Mr. Chair, thinking in terms of what David just finished commenting on, the first part of the meeting is over. The second part was to set on the agenda. We deal with that, and after that's dealt with, then we go into new business, at which point in time I understand that there's a potential for a couple of motions. Even Mr. Christopherson had something that he had potentially to get onto the table. So in fairness to Mr. Christopherson's comments, I think that we should just continue on with the preset agenda.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask another clarification?
Yeah.
The motion that was placed by the government that this committee, I'm paraphrasing, but affirms the appointment or agrees with the appointment, do we have to deal with that motion before we have concluded our business with this witness? And I guess the other question is, does the process of ultimately appointing senators hinge on this committee giving this approval, or is this something that runs parallel to the actual process of them sitting down and doing their work, and what we say is maybe interesting to somebody but doesn't have any role in the trigger point of decision making? Yeah,
well, to answer your second question, that if the committee makes a motion, they can or cannot make a motion. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It doesn't have any effect on it's just giving a feedback from the committee, but it doesn't have any effect on, whether the appointment goes ahead or anything.
Okay.
Sometimes committees in the past, as you probably know, have made, after such a witness and order and council appointment, have made a motion of saying that they had the person before. And
so if that motion failed, it would have no impact on the process?
Right.
Interesting. Then just for a matter of housekeeping then, so when are you suggesting we would deal with that motion and Mr. Richards' motion?
Well, I think it's up to the committee, but my suggestion would be, so in respect of the researcher who's done this work on a report and was expecting to start at 1 o'clock, that we do that, and then we do all those committee business types of things in our next agenda at the end.
Very good. Okay, then what I would leave you with, Chair, is just this thought. It sounds like it doesn't matter whether we pass that motion or not. Fair enough. However, Mr. Richards' motion was critically important because it spoke to us wanting to have a second step in our process of approval vis-a-vis inviting in the minister to talk about the context of the appointment. So when would that be dealt with? You not see us dealing with that now? Because here's the option, Chair, and then I'll shut up, is that we can deal with that now as a continuation because this hour of the meeting is ours to control. It's our staff reporting to us. It's not like we're tying up witnesses or there's timelines that we have to meet, and so I would just leave with you one suggestion that there is some merit in at least seeing if we can deal with those two motions to put, paid and finished to the file of calling in this witness. But I leave it with you and obviously the will of the committee. Thanks.
Can I simply propose we deal with my motion first then? First of all, let me ask the question, did you receive my motion? Because you suspended right after I moved it?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
obviously that would be inappropriate. My motion was moved first, therefore it would be first in the order of precedence.
So my preference is, as I said before, is to go on with the report. Your motion, I don't think Mr. Chan's motion is time sensitive, but your motion and a number of other things we have is part of potential committee business, so we have to do that today. So I'm not saying we don't do it, but there's a number of other things related to it. We do that all in the discussion is at the end here. Mr. Reid.
We're down to 35 minutes before the end of our meeting. I suppose we could agree to continue on past 1 o'clock, but failing that, I suggest that we actually deal with the motions first, and then with Andre Barnes and his report later. I apologize, Andre, well, you're used to us doing stuff like this, so from previous parliaments. But I would strongly recommend that. There is a matter of urgency here, and of course, we will not, unless we create a special meeting, which I'm going to recommend in an amendment to Mr. Richards' motion, it would be impossible for us to meet until after the phase 1 process is completed and all nominations are in, which, as you know, I think is very important. So I say we stay on the motions.
Any other comments? I mean, the other thing we can do is have a subcommittee meeting because we have a lot of agenda items now, potential agenda items. Mr. Richards, your motion, the electoral officers item, a few other things.
Did Mr. Richards, can you provide us a copy of your actual motion? Did you move and second the motion already?
I did move the motion, yes.
Can we have the clerk read back? Can we have the clerk read back the original motion, please?
Clerk, you want to read the motion back? Do you have it? Oh, Mr. Richards, maybe you could read your motion again.
Glad to do that, certainly. So the motion that I would move is given that the committee is unable to properly examine the qualifications and competence of the appointees of the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments without first knowing the full mandate and process involved for the new Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments, and given that the full details of the transitional and permanent Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments process have not been made public, that the committee ask the clerk to invite the Minister of Democratic Institutions to appear before the committee to answer questions and give details regarding the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments process.
So,
Point of order.
Comments on how we proceed at this time?
Point of order. I just wanted to clarify that. I just want the chair's clarification that matter was in fact moved and seconded.
It doesn't have to be seconded. So I don't have it all, but he wants to invite.
It doesn't have to be seconded, but it's moved. Whether it was moved then or moved now, it's moved.
If you want it, you can.
Oh, Mr. Lamoureux.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, not to make things matters more complicated. All I heard earlier from Mr. Richards was that he would like to move a motion to have the minister appear before a committee. What we just heard was a detailed motion. That's the first time I heard the detailed motion, and that's why I'm questioning was in fact there was a formal movement of that motion. I don't think you can say I'm going to move a motion on X, and then an hour later say, let me provide the details of that motion. What Mr. Chan had moved was actually the detail of a motion, and Hansard would clearly demonstrate that that would be the case.
Okay, I don't want to get into all this argument about who proposed what when. The motion, there was a lot of preamble, but the motion is that we bring the minister. But what I need to know now is the order we want to do things now. Do we want to carry on with motions? Do we want to go in camera and do committee business? Do we want to hear the report?
Sure.
Mr. Christopherson.
My sense, Chair, is that somehow we'll manage through the next 30 minutes and do whatever, but I think you can see that we desperately need a subcommittee meeting to start getting some of these things, these ducks in order. And you know, there's a little bit of partisanship in some of it, but there's still a whole lot of other work that is nonpartisan that we want to get to. I urge you to please call a subcommittee as quickly as possible to help sort out this whole thing, and hopefully we can make recommendations back to the full committee.
Committee in agreement with that? Mr. Reid.
Before we agree, as long as we don't have the effect of causing Mr. Richards' motion to be shunted off to the subcommittee. Okay, that wasn't if that wasn't the intention. Yeah, no, in that case, I think it's a good point. You know, that a subcommittee being very handy, and I'd like us to move, if possible, directly to consideration of motions after that.
So, it's agreed. We're going to have a subcommittee now. Let's quickly pick a time when the members that are on the subcommittee. Are you talking about this week, which is basically the rest of today, or the first day back? The members that are on the committee, Mr. Christopherson?
Well, I guess common sense would dictate probably the day we get back. I mean,
are people in favor of that?
And
okay.
I would leave, quite frankly, until we actually sort out a time, and that can't happen until we all sit down. I'd be prepared, Chair, if you could try to work with because there's only a couple of other appointees, to find a time that works. Use your judgment, call the first one, and then see if we can come to an agreement on a regularized time for the subcommittee.
So we'll likely have a subcommittee meeting on the Monday on when we return. We'll figure out a time with the people. And
I would simply note just that we're actually not returning on the Monday. We're returning on the Tuesday because of Family Day, so we're not scheduled to return on the 15th.
Okay.
Do we want to use committee time for that?
That means we set the day we come back. So.
So we might see if we can meet before the committee meeting that day.
Otherwise, we're going to be repeating this same circular discussion.
Okay. Now, for the rest of this meeting, we could do motions or we can do a report. Mr. Christopherson.
As much as I want to get to the report because it's an important matter and we're all trying to get that moved as quickly as possible, I still think, though, that in this case, because that motion flows directly from the witness we just heard, we should probably hear Mr. Richards' motion first. It did come first, and secondly, it's germane to the matter that we've had in front of us for most of this meeting. Maybe we'll wrap that up by 1 o'clock and it'll put us a little bit behind, but at least we would have completed totally the work of the witness and ensuing motions today, and we can move on for the next meeting instead of bouncing all around. But just my thoughts.
Any other comments on where we go now?
Mr. Chair.
No, my only comment was that my comment was simply that we have two motions before the floor. If we're going to dispense with them, we should try to dispense with both before 1 o'clock.
Okay. Committee in agreement. We'll try to dispense with both motions by 1 o'clock.
So what was that again? We'll
try to dispense.
Okay, good. Yeah,
dispense both. I guess we'll have you in our next meeting.
Sure.
Well, sorry? Yeah. Okay. So we have two motions. One was on the saying that we had the witness, and the other was on a committee meeting with the Minister of Democratic Reform. Which motion does the committee want to do first?
Mr. Chair, I would argue that because mine was moved first, it should be dealt with first.
Any objections? Okay, so we'll read the motion as the clerk feels that she has been able to collect. That the committee invite the Minister of Democratic Reform to appear before the committee to respond to questions concerning the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Lamoureux, and then Mr. Chan.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do have some questions in regards to it. I found it was interesting. You know, through goodwill, we're trying to work with the opposition. At the last meeting that had taken place, I sat and observed a member of the Liberal caucus actually move a motion by using the standing orders of our rules to have an appointment come before us. And I thought that was, everyone seemed to be quite encouraged about it. The standing orders provides the details in terms of what it is that we're able to ask and not to ask. Now, this is something in which Mr. Richards, you would have known, Mr. Reid, you guys are not new to this system. You know, I thought the idea of the qualifications and competence, there was validity to it. That's what the rule says. That's what we asked them to do. My concern is that, look, if we're saying we didn't really want that, and that's what I'm hearing, you didn't really want that, what you really wanted was to talk about government policy, government process, and to take an issue and then have it debated before a PROC committee. Well, if you were to use that same process, you could take a wide variety of different issues and say, well, today we want Minister X, tomorrow we want Minister Y, and you know, where does it end? I can understand and appreciate that there might have been some frustration on your part in terms of not necessarily getting to ask the types of questions you were really wanting to ask, but maybe that should have been raised on Tuesday, and when there was a sense of goodwill and faith in terms of trying to accommodate an appointment. We went in good faith, believing that members were genuine in wanting to get a better understanding of the qualifications and the competence. I was actually quite pleased to see that in fact, the chair was able to make herself available to come to committee within 48 hours of the board making that decision. And now, because the issue of the process wasn't being dealt with, well, then that seemed to be your primary concern. Why did we even call for the chair? Why didn't you just express it right at the onset that we would rather have the minister? And if, in fact, any legislation is required that's referred to our committee, or if the House as a whole refers the issue to our committee, then I think that there is a lot more validity in terms of being able to call the minister. I'm just not clear, and Mr. Richards, I would look to you to provide some clarification so that all the committee members, and even though I'm not a committee member, I am obviously very interested in getting a better understanding, because maybe it's something we should be taking into consideration on rule changes. We're looking at rule changes. Maybe this is something that's up for discussion that we should be having. But I don't quite understand what your motivations are in regards to, at one time, leading the committee to believe that all we were going to be doing is talking about qualifications and competence of a particular appointment, and now somehow turning that around where you want to talk about the process of the Senate appointment. You have many other forums in which that can be done in. You know, today we're debating one of the official opposition's motions. The debate today could have, that's taking place on the floor of the House of Commons, could have just as easily been about the Senate. You, and in particular Mr. Reid, has had numerous questions in question period, asking the minister that we're trying to call before the committee. There are many other forums, and I'm just questioning why it is, on the surface, 48 hours ago, you were suggesting we would like to review the qualifications and the competence of an appointment, and we bought into it. That's the reason why I guess we were the ones that actually moved the amendment. I mean, the motion to have her come before the committee. I thought that was a very, a gesture. We talk about, parliamentary reform, and here's, 2 days or 3 days into it, and we're calling already a witness. We weren't trying to hide anything. And then the witness comes and performs, and then right away you're deviating away from competence and qualifications and wanting to pick up a line of questioning that would have been better posed to the Minister of Democratic Reform, quite possibly. And I'm beginning to think that maybe that was your original agenda, the original purpose of having the discussion. And that's why I think at the very least, if not to me, to committee members, that you need to better explain why it is that you even wanted to have this particular appointment to come before the committee if your real intent was to talk about process and mandate. Because if it was to talk about process and mandate, I would highly recommend that at the very least there be some discussions that would take place that would have been clearer in what it is that was being asked of the committee to do, at the very least. And if you couldn't develop that consensus, then there's a responsibility in terms of, as an official opposition, you can raise the issue. You know, instead of talking about deficits, whether there was or was not a deficit, we could have been talking about this issue today. Or you could ultimately, I'll wind up, Dave, anyway. Or whether or not we could have been actually having the minister come before the committee, and we could have had that discussion then. But my concern would be is that do you have other intentions? Like, are there other ministers that you ultimately want to be able to call? So I'd appreciate maybe if you could provide some comment in terms of what was the real reason why you wanted the appointment to be called, and do you not believe that there's other ways in which you'd be able to achieve your questioning on process?
Okay, do you want to respond and then go later again, or?
Yeah, if I
Yeah,
could.
okay, go ahead.
It sounds like the Parliament Secretary certainly has a number of questions that he wanted to have responses to there, so I'm happy to provide those. And I think that's precisely the point. Their government doesn't seem to want to provide answers to questions, and I'm happy to do that. You know, the bottom line is here, we've been one of the, under those standing orders 110 and 111, this committee has the duty and the ability to be able to have a nominee come before us, to be able to examine their qualifications, to be able to perform the duties of the post that they have been appointed to. In order to be able to assess those qualifications and to be able to determine their ability to perform on those duties, we must have a good sense of what those are. And because the government has been very secretive in terms of what the process would look like, sure, there has been some detail provided, but there is a lot of detail that lacks in terms of the consultation process with a variety of different groups. As one example, there's a number of examples. And the problem here is that we've got a government that is taking a process to appoint senators, created this process to appoint senators, which, you know, they claim is some kind of a reform to the Senate. But it's a very secretive process. We actually know Canadians won't even have any idea at the end of that process whether any of the people that have been selected by this committee, this board, would even be appointed by the Prime Minister. There'll be no way to ever know whether the committee actually was able to perform its duty. And so to be able to properly assess this, we have to have a better sense as to what that process is, what those consultations would look like, and what the outcomes would be, because when you look at the permanent phase of the program, it's indicating that the board would be the ones that would be providing recommendations on what that permanent process would look like, and we have no idea what that would look like now. And so if we can't actually be able to assess, in the board really, we have no way of knowing whether that those changes that are being recommended by the board are going to be based on any kind of logic. So we have to actually have a sense as to what this process is, what this will look like. To be, if you listen to the questions that I had for the chair that was before us today, I was trying to get some sense as to what that process would look like, so I can assess the ability for the board, the members, to be able to do the job. But we weren't able to get any answers because we were told that she couldn't answer that part of the questioning. There was, other members who had questions. Mr. Reid had some very significant and serious questions that, if it isn't the job of a committee like ours to be able to have a sense as to whether the Constitution of Canada is being followed in a process that the government is trying to set up, I think that's pretty sad statement on this government if they are not interested in knowing whether the Constitution is being followed in a process. So for us to be able to properly assess this, we must have a sense of the process, a far better sense that the government is trying to keep secret. So I guess the question I would have back to the Parliamentary Secretary is it the position of this government that this minister shouldn't be responsible for this process and ensuring that Canadians have confidence in it? How can they possibly have confidence in the work that's being done if we have no sense as to what the work is supposed to be and what it will look like, and if it's going to be held secret from Canadians? And that's exactly what the government is doing. And so to be able to bring the minister here to be able to properly assess the process so we can lay that against the qualifications of the people that are charged with doing that process are the only way we can properly discharge our duties under these two standing orders. And that's why it's so vitally important that the Minister of Democratic Institutions appears before this committee so we can properly do our job. And if the government is going to try to prevent us from doing our job as a committee, that's also a pretty sad start on some what they would call real change.
Okay, before I go any further, we're going to have, in a minute, we'll have Mr. Lamoureux respond to the question he was just given. Then the order is Mr. Chen, Mr. Reeds, Mr. Richards, and Mr. Christofferson on the list. Mr. Reed and Mr. Richards, when it does come back to you, I wouldn't mind, the clerk has pointed out it's not sure where this would fall in our mandate. If you look at, while you have some time while they're talking, Section 108, subsection 3 that describes our committee's mandate, to see whether this actually falls in the mandate and just describe to us where it does. And Mr. Lamoureux, could you reply to the question from Mr. Richards?
Yes, I appreciate the answer, Blake. I really do, but I think that in good part it's somewhat misguided. If you look at the type of questions that you're even putting on the table, you're raising issues about the constitutionality. You're talking about the process. You're talking about what sort of consultations. These are all questions, and I'm not going to, say it's a good question, bad question. That's fine. You're entitled to ask whatever questions you want. My concern is that we had this discussion 48 hours ago where there was concern that was initially raised by the official opposition in regards to the qualifications of one of the appointees. In a gesture of goodwill, like you made reference in terms of, it's the committee doing things differently. Well, you look at it, it was a committee member. Was it Ruby? I think, was it you or one of, I believe it was.
Mr. Chair, I will be very brief in this point, but the Parliamentary Secretary has just indicated that we expressed concerns about the qualifications of one particular appointee. Nobody expressed concerns about the qualifications of any one particular appointee.
Oh yes, true.
We're just simply trying to get a sense as to the qualifications to be able to do the duties that are asked of them. And if we cannot be given the information by this government about what those duties are, how can we possibly assess the qualifications? It's like asking us to do an assessment of someone's ability to do a job without giving us the job description. And that's what this government is doing. It's keeping the process a secret, the consultation process a secret, and therefore we cannot properly assess the qualifications. It's not a questioning anyone's duty. It's ability to do the job. We have no way of being able to assess that because we don't know what the qualifications that they need are, because we don't know what the process is.
Well, agree with the point of order, so don't touch on the qualifications of the person.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, Mr. Richards, you.
Order. While we're dealing with points of order, I just want to point out, Chair, and ask if you think that this is acceptable in terms of the regular business of this committee. Mr. Lamoureux is not even a member of this committee. He has, and the government members went out of their way to say how grown up they were and quite capable of leading themselves, and they didn't need Mr. Lamoureux for that. The guy's not even a member of the committee. He represents the government, the PMO. He's leading all the discussions, and the real members of the committee are just sitting there. Is that regular business to you, Chair? Is that a new era? Do you see anything a little bit amiss here with this kind of dialogue?
Mr. Christofferson, the official opposition asked Mr. Lamoureux a question, so I can't refuse him that opportunity.
It wasn't, no, I'm not pointing just to this one question. He's the only one that's been talking all along.
Well, we have a long list, actually.
This is ridiculous. This government said they were going to do things different. This is not different. At least Mr. Lukiski had the legitimacy and decency to sit in the driver's seat when he was driving. This member is not even a member of the committee, and he's driving the committee.
Well, we have a list of 5 members, so you want to finish
This
answering
is
the question?
ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Just to do a very quick response to Mr. Christopherson, we had a witness here today. I did not even ask a question. All 4 members, or at least 4 members of the committee, asked the question. It wasn't me that moved the motion to ultimately call upon the witness. I didn't move the motion, David.
Did.
No, I did not. I said a member of the committee.
Sorry, I thought you said I moved. My apologies.
So, in good part, I'm responding to a question currently. I raised the issue based on earlier, prior to the question, just based on my experiences from the chamber and the committee, and this is where I'd like to go back to. This is where I'd like to go back to, Mr. Chair. There are changes. Mr. Richards, you raised some valid points, but the points that you raise are more of policy and process. And you're saying that we need to have a better understanding of a number of issues in order to be able to question the qualifications and the competence, if I understand what it is that you were saying in your last statement. And if that is the case, then in all likelihood, maybe we should not have called for the appointed individual to come before us. The official opposition's actual position was not questioning the qualifications. And you're right when you made the statement that you're not questioning the qualifications, whether or not that person's qualified. I think that we heard, pardon me?
That's the qualifications. That doesn't mean we're questioning.
That's right. You want to be able to. That's right. Big difference, right?
Assess the qualifications.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the reason why we had, or the government members on the committee had agreed to that. And it's not only that particular member, but if you recall, the discussion that we had was within 48 hours ago is, let's see if we can get some of the appointments to be able to come before the committee, and it's better to have it Thursday, even if it's 1 or 2, as opposed to waiting the extra period of time where we might be able to get a larger number. So that was the compromise towards it. At the end of the day, once it's all said and done, I think that the first hour was fruitful in the sense that it provided members of this committee, as Mr. Chan had put forward in a motion, confidence that the person that's chairing it does have qualifications and does have the competence in order to do the task that has been asked of her. In regards to the process, well, let's debate that. Let's debate it in the House of Commons. Let's debate it in many different other venues. I'm just not convinced that this is the venue in which we do that unless the committee ultimately decides that they want to do this. But keep in mind, what we do in PROC might have ripple effects that affect other committees. So then you could have other committees saying, well, I want Minister Y, I want Minister Z. And there are opportunities when you will get those ministers. Different committees will get those ministers, whether it's estimates, whether it's legislation, or so forth.
Point of order, Mr. Reid.
I get the impression that Mr. Lamoureux, who actually is not a member of this committee, is engaging in a filibuster designed to take us past our concluding point. I couldn't help you noticing you were looking at the clock. You must have the same inquiry. So I wonder if you could wrap up his comments and let us, Mr. Chan, and I'd be happy to forego my comments as well if we can actually come to a vote on this motion. There's only 5 minutes left, or else alternatively we could go and agree to extend the time that we are meeting today in order to deal with this more fulsome discussion, one or the other, so that we actually do deal with this motion.
Ms. Sahota, on the point of order.
Sorry, not on the point of order.
So our list is Mr. Chan, Mr. Reid, Mr. Richards, Mr. Christopherson, Mr. Sahota. Mr. Chan, or you were finished, Mr. Lamoureux?
I was simply going to, but I want to back up here just quickly, and because I recognize the time here. The government side, we're prepared to actually drop all of our particular comments on this particular motion before you, and bring the matter to a vote. But I simply note that it's kind of rich that we're in this situation because your government didn't deal with 22 appointees for over 2 years, and we're now in this sort of situation that constitutionally we have to fill those vacancies, otherwise at a certain point, the Senate simply cannot function. That issue aside, well, there is a constitutional requirement at the end of the day, okay, that sets this particular body in the Constitution that it needs to operate. And it was getting to the point where it was becoming dysfunctional because the previous government chose not to fill those particular vacancies. That issue aside, can I simply ask the clerk to read back the motion again, because we're actually prepared on this side to vote on the motion right now.
Here it is. He asked you to read it.
That the committee invite the Minister of Democratic Reform to appear before it to respond to questions concerning the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments.
And we've not yet determined whether it fits in the mandate of the committee, but sorry? You want to go back to the speakers list?
Where else are we?
Mr. Reid, are you finished? You were finished? We read the motion. Mr. Reid.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, with regard to the mandate of this committee, which is laid out in the standing orders, standing order number 108, subsection 3, sub A, the procedure in House Affairs, the mandate of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs shall include, in addition to the duties set forth in Standing Order 104, and among other matters, and it has a list. The among other matters means that we have a mandate that can be interpreted as expanding to include not merely the narrow objects laid out in section 108 sub 3. In other words, there's no problem in hearing from the minister. I'll just point out, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, that under our Constitution, since time immemorial, or at any rate, since the development of responsible government, both here and in the mother country, all ministers have to report to the House of Commons. The House of Commons has oversight over all of them. The Minister of Democratic Institutions and her predecessor, the Democratic Reform Minister, always reported to this committee. That's an established practice, so that is the authorization for doing this. Final comment here on a somewhat different subject. It's critical that she be invited here, and so this is going to you. You're in charge of timing. She be invited here to meet with us during the break week, unless you can meet with us tomorrow, because of the fact that the Phase 1 appointment process shuts. A process that of course I'm arguing is unconstitutional. And I asked her about this in the House of Commons, and she did not answer when I said, I think it's unconstitutional. Do you have legal advice? That process closes on the 15th, on Family Day, on the Monday before we reconvene. So this must be a special meeting. And so I am imploring you as chair of the committee to set a special time between now and the 15th, and not wait until our regularly scheduled meeting, which will be too late. It will be on the 16th, after that process, which may be unconstitutional, is closed, and the damage done by following that process has been made.
Mr. Richards, you're up.
Watch out, we're about to talk about our motion.
I forgo my spot, although I will point out, Mr. Chair, that I really believe it's important to that we deal with this motion and have it voted on before the conclusion of this meeting, and if that requires a little extra time, we should take it.
Mr. Christopherson.
Chair, with that regard, I have a few things to say, but I really do mean few. I'm not, but I would like to get them on the record. If we can agree on a small extension, my purpose would be to come to a conclusion and have the votes.
So we're at the time we need a committee decision on whether we're going to extend. Any comments? Whether we extend the time. The time is up, so is the committee agreed to extend time? We're past 1 o'clock now.
5, 6 minutes. I really don't have a lot, just a couple of things I want to get on the record on the motion, and that's it. I don't know about anybody else. Otherwise, we don't pass motions. It's that simple.
Sorry, Mr. Burr, Mr. Graham.
I lost my thingy. I'd just like to amend it to the end of the motion to conclude with subject to the availability of the minister.
So you're amending the motion. We have to vote on the time, though, first. We're past the time.
How about an end time? I mean, availability could be never. No, I mean availability of the minister. You're talking about the motion, right?
I'm talking about the motion, not not the. We've already agreed to extend, haven't we?
Yeah.
Okay, you're proposing 1:15. The committee extended to 1:15.
Yeah. We can do it in a few-minute blocks.
Extending it, David?
Because you, the government, seem to want to get these motions passed today. We, the opposition, are not looking to delay that, but partly because you took the floor for so long, there's not enough time to get the comments in before 1 o'clock. So I just want to get, all I'm asking for individually is about 4 to 6 minutes, 5 minutes, to get my piece on the record, and then I'm ready to vote. But we can't do that if we don't have an extension. And I can't speak for my colleagues, but that's where I am. And they've already indicated they're looking to see this come to a vote. So it's up to you. If you want the motion, you got to give us another 15, 20 minutes. If you don't care, let's adjourn.
Speaking, Mr. Chair, I suspect, and again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee.
Why not? You speak on behalf of that half.
Well, Mr. David.
Go ahead. What's your point?
You're not being fair, David, on this. It's now past 1 o'clock.
I'm not being fair. You shouldn't even be here.
Typically, every member has a right to sit in the committee. Every member has a right. Don't try to deprive members the right to be able to sit in the committee. And Mr. Chair, all I'm trying to do is just to help facilitate.
Yeah, you're a big help.
To facilitate. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Big help.
If you want to speak for another 3, 4, 5 minutes, fine. Go ahead. I don't have a problem with doing that. I don't think any other committee member does. Talk.
Okay, well, for now, we'll extend for 5 minutes for Mr. Christopherson to make his...
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the PMO is going to allow me to have a few words. So all I wanted to say was in support of the motion that, and it sounded like there might have been a compromise in the works, and if there is, that would be excellent. That would mean that the government that really is trying to make the committee business different. Because here's my point. One of the reasons I would support this, as I don't always, I mean, the politics are you could always haul in a minister and play politics with it, but as a rule, we do not. So I try to be judicial about when I support calling in a minister because they got their own table, the cabinet room. This is ours, the committee room. However, in this case, given the importance of what's going on, B, how quickly everything happened, C, the fact that there really hasn't been a lot of public discussion. There was not, I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there was a motion with a full debate in the House about this whole process. I don't believe there was a bill in the House with full process that allowed full debate about it. So really, Mr. Richards' point that this thing has all been created in the dark, in secrecy, the end result, here's the rules, has been made public, but there's been no opportunity to have discussions, such as, why is it okay that a small group of people get to decide what the definition of diversity is in Canada? Why is it that a small group of Canadians get to decide whether someone's personality traits are such that they're going to be democratic and accountable or not? These are fair questions to ask when we're talking about appointing a chamber whose members, remember, Chair, have more legal weight than each of ours because there's fewer of them. So I think it's fair for the official opposition to ask the government to bring in the minister, bring us up to speed. When we say us, we know, give or take some of the details, but it's the public. And this government, again, I come back, and I will not stop coming back. The government said they were going to do things different, that they were going to be more democratic, more transparent, more accountable. Okay. A reasonable motion to bring in a minister to talk about what the government has done so far, given that we haven't had the other usual opportunities, i.e. House discussion or committee discussion, to get at those answers. So I think there's every good reason why this process here at this committee would serve the public interest if we had the minister come in and ask some of the questions that we have and the public have before you even get into the partisanship, just legitimate questions about the process, because we've had no opportunity to do that. And I would argue that that is legitimately Canadians' right as well as the opposition, but in particular in light of this government's platform that they were going to be different, that they were going to provide accountability. Now, I heard Mr. Graham mention a minute ago, well, would you accept if the minister at their availability? That sounded like the beginnings of negotiations, an attempt to listen to what the opposition is saying and try to accommodate it. And I would respond to Mr. Graham that I certainly would be open to that kind of an amendment as long as there's a deadline on it, because otherwise it's, well, guess what? The minister's never available, and therefore the intent of the motion is negated through passive-aggressive measures. So if the government said no later than like 5 calendar days after returning or something.
Bring before the deadline.
Oh, there's the 15th deadline. Well, so be it. That's their problem, not ours. They created the process. They created the. We can't change the calendar, and we can only do what we can do. So if the government's actually looking for a compromise, they're looking for a little bit of flexibility where we would bring the minister in, because I don't think you can say that this is a partisan attempt. Really, in light of the fact that there's been so little public discussion, I think in this case you can legitimately make the case the minister should come in somewhere in our democratic process and give detailed answers about why they did certain things, why they didn't do other things, what expectations is the government looking for. All those things are quite legitimate. So before I go any further, Chair, I would just ask if Mr. Graham and or any other members of the government are interested in trying to find a motion that we could all agree on, or whether we're just heading for a majority vote and the rest of it's just smoke and mirrors anyway.
Well, Ms. Sahota is next on the list, but we'll let Mr. Graham.
From Mr. Graham, but I'll take a clarification from Ms. Sahota.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I must state for the record and comment on the fact that we're more than willing to compromise on the government side, and we've shown this time and time again since this committee has started. First of all, a few days ago, we were asked to bring in the chair of the committee for the advisory board. We did that within very short notice. And I believe the opposition, the official opposition, wanted the whole committee to come in, and we were more than willing to try to get as many people in as possible. Today, I witnessed sitting here, as we had the chairman here, barely anybody was listening to her qualifications and her answers the whole time. So I just, on the record, want to state that, as I sat here watching this process, since I am new to this committee, I found it really interesting that, the opposition was so interested to bring somebody in to question their abilities, but then when they were here, didn't care to listen to her abilities. I found that a little bit appalling, actually. And we are, once again, I'm not opposing what you're saying. We are more than willing to compromise on this one as well. I just hope going forward, we also have another witness we were supposed to question today, and he's been sitting here all day prepared to, give his answers. But still, he's prepared to speak today. So we've been showing a lot of compromise, and I think we are ready to vote on this side and continue to show that we are more than willing to make things and cooperate, make things work on this committee.
Mr. Graham, do you want to answer Mr. Christopherson's question?
Well, I'm certainly willing to compromise. That's why I'm suggesting that we make it subject to the availability of the minister. We can't prescribe what that was going to be. But
you can't leave it completely open-ended, David. There's got to be some kind of, because suddenly the minister is just never available.
Well, it's much more likely to happen if you give a deadline than if you don't. But I'd say I'd move the motion. I don't know how to make it go to vote, but I'd put the amendment to a vote.
You can't. What are you doing?
I'm asking what I can do.
Okay.
Is that fair?
That's fair, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you're not trying to do
now
something, but asking, that's fair.
This is how we get along. I like it.
Repeat the amendment.
So the amendment was simply to add at the end of the motion.
And then we're going to have to agree to extend the time some more because we're past the 5 minutes.
Well, it couldn't go too much longer. We'll end up running into tomorrow. I suggest that the original motion be amended simply to read subject to the availability of the minister at the end.
The floor.
Yeah, okay, back to you. He answered your
And I would say that we're probably close, but when you leave it to availability of the minute, I just finished dealing the better part of 10 years with a government that just played every single game possible, and I haven't seen a lot of indications you're going to do things a whole lot different. So I'm sorry, I'm quite prepared to accept that as one member of this side, but I got to hear a deadline. There's got to be some kind of end to it rather than just the availability. Otherwise, the minister miraculously is never available when we're meeting, and as I said, it effectively negates the motion.
Can I speak to this?
But if we're not going to come to agreement on that, I said I would only take a few minutes to make my point. I will do that and let it go. But Madame Sahota was saying, well, was trying to move it along and saying, well, we're listening, but now we want to vote. Well, that's just using their majority, just waiting till everybody's finished talking so they can use their majority to shut everything down. Anyway, my point is, I'll end with this. I think the motion has legitimate value. I think it's quite legitimate. I was very pleased to hear Mr. Graham. That sounded like they were maybe interested in having the minister in. We just had to agree on time frame. It can't quite be the way they're suggesting, but it would just take a minor tweak, and I think we could get a unanimous vote. So I remain optimistic that it'll happen, but whether it does or not, I think it has great merit, and I'm pleased to support that motion. And c'est tout.
Okay, before Mr. Hold it. You can't speak yet. We have to extend the time again. We're out of time again. So is there agreement to extend the time another 5 minutes? Okay. Okay, we're extending another 5 minutes. Could you keep the time, clerk? Mr. Chan.
We're prepared to put it to a vote, but the issue for us on our side is that we need to simply consult to see when the minister is available. The time frame that you're talking about, Mr. Richards, we don't know. We're on break week next week, right? So, constituency week, right? So, we just want the opportunity to go back and actually ask the minister, when are you available? We have no issue with the minister appearing before the point, and that's why I said I'm prepared to bring this to a vote. We're prepared to bring the minister before this meeting, but we have to be able to consult, have her check.
Let's come back for a day and hold a hearing.
I don't know if she's available.
I drive right through her riding. I'll pick her up.
You're not out of the...
I yield the floor. The amendment is put.
Any more discussion on the amendment, which is subject to the availability of the minister? Mr. Reid.
It's always subject to the availability of the minister. I've never yet seen, except in the most extraordinary circumstances where there was an attempt to bring down the government over allegations of a contempt of Parliament, a situation where we ever didn't have it effectively, where you actually were saying we're issuing effectively a writ for the minister to be forced to testify here. In fact, the only time anything like that has ever been done is when we brought in, what's his name, Shriver, right? Remember that?
Yep.
That's it. Like, it's always subject to the availability. We expect her, morally, and she must know this because I assume this is on CPAC, so she can watch if she wants. Someone's monitoring it in her office. She knows we want her on this side here before the 15th, and we'll make ourselves available. I'm confident the government can find enough members to be available, even if the specific individuals here can't be. So, you know, I actually will be voting against the amendment, but not because I don't think we should try to accommodate her. I do think, however, she should try to accommodate us and allow us to be assured that her process is actually constitutional before the clock runs out on the 15th. I think she can understand the importance of that.
Any more discussion on the amendment? Mr. Christopherson.
It doesn't sound like the government's going to give the assurance we need, so, you know, I get two choices. I either take them on their word that the minister will come in a timely fashion or not. Given that we've done this in public, usually we get screwed over when we're in camera and these things don't come out publicly. So at least this time, everybody's seen the discussion, and if the minister, like weeks later, is still not here, then we've got a lot of ground to make the case that they were. So I'm going to trust the government that the minister will make herself available in a timely fashion vis-a-vis our needs too, and we'll be supporting the amendment.
Ms. Soda.
I just need to make a comment again. I don't understand, if it's always subject to her availability, why there's any opposition to this amendment.
Simply because while is subject to her availability. Any minister who is unwilling to appear before a committee to deal with the constitutionality of the system that she designed on a deadline she designed before that deadline expired is not formally in contempt of Parliament, but is acting contemptuously for Parliament. She can clear, morally, she can clear anything off her agenda, aside from some kind of personal health crisis or tragedy in the family, to be here. And so she should darn well make herself available. I want to make that point by voting against this. But having said that, if the government pushes the amendment through, I'll then be voting for the main motion as well. And I'll be asking that we make every effort to get her here next week.
He'll support the amended motion at the end of the day.
So can we put the motion?
Your amendment?
The amendment, thank
Well,
you.
the amendment.
That one.
You've already put the amendment.
Yes. Okay. So
Okay. So, call the question on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment which says, subject to the availability of the minister? Opposed? Amendment carried. Now discussion on the motion as amended.
He wants to.
On the motion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
Okay, recorded vote.
I will go first. In favor? Yes.
Just wait till the clerk's got her list ready.
Sorry.
On the motion, Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Reid? Yes. Mr. Schmelz? Yes. Mr. Christopherson?
Wait.
Mr. Chan? Yes. Mr. Graham?
yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor? Oui. Ms. Sahota?
Yes.
Ms. Vandenbeld?
Yes.
Did you get everyone? Yeah. Okay, the motion's carried. Meeting's adjourned.